And now I will let everyone in.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us at our info session about what is Studio and Portfolio How-Tos. We're just going to wait maybe a minute to see. One of our guest speakers hasn't arrived yet, so we're just going to wait a minute just to see if she does show up. Otherwise, we'll start at 5:04.
Jennifer, are you talking about Michelle?
Yeah.
This is Michelle. I have to phone in. There's a problem with Zoom with the city's technology.
You are here. Okay, great.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks for letting us know. You're 036.
Okay.
So welcome everybody. My name is Vita Leung. I'm the manager of marketing and communications with the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape. Like I said earlier, this is the info session about what is Studio and Portfolio How-To Tips with Alumni. Just wanted you guys to know that we are recording this event for future use. Just before we get started, we would like to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7. Which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piguni, and Kainai First Nations, as well as Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Wesley First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. By the signing of Treaty 7 in 1877, the university recognizes that we are all treaty people. So the 4 guest alumni who we have here today are practicing in their fields, and they're going to share their professional path from design school into the various streams of their careers, pretty diverse. Each guest will also share insights from tips and perspectives right into portfolio development. So we're going to do this in 2 panel sessions, and then we're going to do a Q&A after each session where you can either text your question in the chat or text that you have a question, and then we'll read them out, or we can ask you to turn on your mic to say your question. So just to introduce the 4 alumni, Jessie Angelic, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly. She's a partner at Spectacle Bureau for Architecture and Urbanism. She also is a studio special instructor with us in our architecture program. Kate Van Frassen, who's Kate and Sophie. She's a senior planner at the City of Calgary, and she's in the citywide policy. Michelle Reed, she's a conservation landscape architect with the City of Calgary, who has a ME-DES with us. And Alexia Karen Roy, who's a planner also with the City of Calgary. She's in legislation and land use bylaw, planning and development. So Jessie, if you want to start things off, that would be really great.
Sure. Well, thanks, Vita, and the team at SAPL for inviting me, and welcome, everybody. I was saying before the panel started, it's such a great initiative that there's this sort of outreach, and I hope that you all get something valuable out of today's session. I'm just going to share my screen here. Oh, I think you may have to enable it, maybe Jen or Vita.
Try it now, see if it works.
Okay. Yeah, that's working. Perfect. Okay. Let's just go full screen. You can see that okay?
Yep.
Great. Okay. So I thought I would start just talking about studio. And Vita, thanks for the introduction. I am an architect and a founding partner of Spectacle, which is a local architecture firm based here in Calgary. And our projects range in scale, everything from ring design up to sort of urban master plans. But I am an alumni of this program at SAPL, and when I think about studio culture, I think this image is a good description of sort of what it feels like, and what it typically looks like in a non-COVID era and experience. But sort of reflecting back on my time in studio, some of the things that really resonated with me, or things that still today I think about, was this culture of learning together with classmates and sort of teaching each other. And I think, you learn a lot through instructors and exposure to visiting professors, but the experience with your classmates who come from very diverse sort of perspectives and backgrounds was a really sort of rich part of my experience. The other part of studio, of course, is learning by doing, and practicing using intention in creating spaces. But also, I think the process of studio is very much about sort of making mistakes, revising and editing and trying again. And so there's this sort of constant iterating that happens within studio as part of the process of making, which includes making models, full-scale installations through block week courses. And then, of course, for me, a big part of my school experience was traveling, going to Barcelona, and sort of seeing for the first time, I guess, real architecture with a capital A in kind of real time, and understanding it through a lived experience rather than sort of understanding it through textbooks or reading books. I had the fortune of also going to Japan during my time in school, and I think this had a huge influence on the way I think about architecture and approach architecture even today. So since school, I have worked in a couple of different firms. I first worked in Calgary at a local firm called Sturgis Architecture, which is an image on the left. And then I also worked in Rotterdam for a little while at a firm there called Powerhouse Company. Both firms were sort of medium-sized, 10 to 20 people. And I had a really great experience at both firms. I was working on quite a variety of different types of projects. At Sturgis, more residential and kind of transportation projects. And then in Rotterdam, I think, the biggest thing for me was being immersed in a new culture, but also a new design culture, which was very much based in kind of competitions and sort of intensity in the design process. After getting some experience, I co-founded Spectacle with my partner, Philip Vandermeer, in 2013. And we really sort of adopted, I guess, this sort of Dutch approach of iterating. And so we really engage in a design process that is responsive to context. We're really interested in context in the widest sense in terms of political, economic, social, and ecological contexts. And pushing the status quo. So we don't specialize in a particular scale or program. We don't only do hospitals, and actually we're interested in always trying to do new work because we think experimenting is important to the design process. And just a few projects that have been kind of important in my career. The first project we ever did as part of Spectacle was called Thinking Hat, which was a project for my hometown, Medicine Hat. I'll wrap up really quickly here. I know my time's done. And so this was a project that looked at sort of activating downtown Medicine Hat. We held an exhibition in a kind of empty, abandoned building, and essentially had sort of very, medium-term, 5 to 10-year proposals for empty sites and for vacant sites. Our first built project is called The Tigers, which is looking at sort of the psychology of sports space. and the sort of black and white nature of sports. And finally, a project I'm working on currently is called The Spot, and it's for a public realm community space in Chinatown, working with Pink Flamingo, which is a sort of local Black queer group who has a mural on an adjacent building. So that is me. I'll stop sharing here.
It's great. Thanks, Jessie. Next up, we have Kate.
Hi, everyone. As Jessie said, thanks so much to the faculty for having me and inviting me to share my experience. And I also echo what Jessie said, that it's really great to have this opportunity for prospective students and current students. So thanks for all the future students and current students for signing up, because if you didn't sign up, there would be no event. Thanks so much. So my name is Kate Van Frassen. As Vita mentioned, I currently work at the City of Calgary as a professional planner. I started out my relationship with the faculty as a student. I actually applied for the old planning program just as there was a whole revolution mix-up happening with the school, so I graduated out of the Masters of Environmental Design program, which was not a sort of strictly planning program by any means, but it gave me the opportunity, which was not what I had originally intended to go through, especially in that first year, the foundation studio and also some other studios throughout my time at the faculty, which was really wonderful. In terms of my professional life, as I was a student, I was able to apply for a limited term position with the town of Canmore, which was seeking new graduates, which worked out to be a permanent role. And I was there for 4 years working as a planner. So definitely a shout out, especially for the current students who are in the audience. Even if it's a temporary role, just apply. You can turn into something more. And after a great experience at the town of Canmore, where I worked on a whole range, is what happens in small towns, a whole range of planning scales and types of projects, from helping out citizens with their deck permits all the way up to rethinking the municipal development plan for the town and thinking another project around managing human use in wildlife corridors. I got a job with the City of Calgary, moved back to Calgary, and my sort of first chunk of time, or my career, as they say at the City of Calgary, was focused around the application process as a file manager in community planning. And then for the last, I guess, year and a half, almost 2 years, I'm very bad at keeping track of time. It's not at all, postpartum brains do not help at all with keeping track of time, so I'm definitely out of luck with getting the time right. But I moved to the land use bylaw team and was able to work with great people like Alexia, who you'll hear from later. And then from there, I then moved to the citywide policy team. But in both those positions, my work is focused on the guidebook for great communities and sort of starting to think about the foundation for renewing the land use bylaw at the City of Calgary. And so in terms of my professional experience and thinking about this session around portfolios, I had a really great experience at this, at my time at the school, and it was all very new for me to be in a studio. That was my first experience since elementary school, even being in anything that was hands-on in terms of making, outside of elementary school art class. And it took quite a bit of adjustment, and there was certainly some imposter syndrome and bumps in the road, but that experience and the exposure to design thinking has, I think, really shaped and provided a foundation for my practice as a planner that allows me to speak in different languages with other professionals, which is a really key thing for planners, because whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, where my career is focused, you're taking in a variety of considerations and ideas from other professions, from the community, from the client in private practice, or applicant or proponents in the public sector. And as the planner, you're trying to translate all of that into a recommendation, to a proposal, or into policy that articulates what a community or municipality is hoping to see happen in the future, and how any one individual project contributes to that. And so that studio experience and work, especially with in any opportunity you have to work, to attend a block week or go to Barcelona, for example, one of the other international experiences where you're working with students from the landscape program or from the architecture, or whatever program you're not in, and you get to work with people from the other programs, I highly recommend it, because no matter which stream you end up in, that experience is invaluable. So I'll leave that for now. And my current role is that I'm in the early days of maternity leave with my daughter Sophie, and did not change the name for this from a different thing that I did from baby rhyme time. So that my name is not Kate and Sophie, but Sophie is a person. All right, thank you.
Seems like it could be a really cute coffee shop.
Maybe, right?
My mom's iPad, she goes to church and she's mommy's iPad, so could be worse. Thanks, Kate. Next up, we have Michelle, and like Kate, I think you also have a Master of Environmental Design degree and a similarly interesting career path. Michelle, can you share your experiences with us? I think I can see you're here, but I can't hear you, so you might be on mute.
Okay, it says I'm unmuted.
We can hear you now.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Yes, I am Michelle Reed. I also work for the City of Calgary. I guess 3/4 of us do. And we all know each other. I had a great experience at EVDS, and before that, my landscape architecture degree I got at the University of Guelph, and also wonderful experience with the concept of studio. It's been a while since I've been in school, so I can't even imagine how much it has changed from when I was using markers and pencil crayons and sitting around chatting with my fellow students as we were filling things in about everything philosophical and how great cities could be if, we followed this, that, and the other. It was a great time. And at EVDS, which is now SAPL, one of the best experiences I had, similar to Kate, was when it was a studio class where the groups were made up of a whole bunch of different students from the different areas. So we had architecture, we had environmental planning, we had regular planning, we had industrial design students, and it was so interesting to see the processes that we came up with. I don't know, do you have anything like that now, Vida?
I think that's probably something Jen maybe should answer that question.
Sorry. Anyway, it was a great collaboration, and it was designed to make sure that we knew how to collaborate with each other, because like Kate said, you learn your own language and you think that other people understand it, and you say things so casually and they don't, and other people, particularly in the industrial design, had such a great way of communicating with things beyond just two-dimensional, which particularly coming from a landscape architecture background, there's just a lot of plan views that you do. So it was great. It was a wonderful experience, and I'm sure you guys will enjoy a lot, even if it is via Zoom. There's a big reliance on your fellow classmates to learn, and it's really fun. So right now, I work for the City of Calgary Parks Department. I, like Kate, got a job at the city when I was still a student. And it evolved into a job first with heritage planning. That's where I started as a student. They were working on a project, a park like Reader Rock Garden. It's an Edwardian era garden in the city. And they were working on that, and then soon the Parks Department seconded me over, and I've been there ever since. I started as a project manager, and now my title is the Cultural Landscape Lead. So I help manage the city's the City of Calgary parks, like our park cultural significant sites. So we have an archaeologist. We're hoping to get an Indigenous strategist on our team. So yeah, I'm very lucky, and really, that's like, I mean, you kind of start your path in school, and you can dream to be things that you want, and it's amazing where it will take you. Did you want me to speak about anything else? I think that was pretty good.
That was great. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks. It's hard not seeing anyone.
It is actually, but we have a nice green circle of you. Next time we'll try Teams. So the last presenter is Alexia. She's a recent graduate of the Master of Landscape Architecture program. She's the newest alumni in the group. So Alexia, please.
Thanks, Vita. Yeah, so thanks to everyone for having me. I'm happy to be talking to some students who are currently or thinking about joining the faculty. I liked design school so much, I went back twice. So I started off my my path by, actually I was studying in natural sciences in a general science program at the U of A. And I was kind of feeling like something was missing. I didn't super love the scientific process and the method. And one day I happened to, I was living at my parents' place, and their neighbor actually was an architect who owned his firm. And he just suggested, why don't you come into work with me and see what the work environment is like in a firm. And that was kind of the beginning of my path to where I am today. And I really, I went to the office with him, and I loved the environment, similar to a lot of architecture and planning and landscape architecture firm. The concept was kind of an open office, and you could tell that people were really collaborating, and it was a creative space, and yet also very productive space. And it was something that I could really see somewhere I could really see myself being happy to go every day. And so pretty much right after that, I applied into the Bachelor of Architecture in Quebec City at Laval University. And so that's where I went and studied an undergrad in architecture. And one thing that kind of stands out about the studio experience for me for the first time, and how it really helps to form you as a professional, is that it's quite a fast pace in studio in general, that you're producing a lot of work in a short amount of time, and you're asked to be creative and kind of rethink your projects in an iterative process. And I think that's something that has I've really carried throughout my professional life. You become a very effective, a very effective person in your work life, and you are not afraid on taking on challenges that you don't know anything about at the beginning, because you're kind of just thrown in and there's not a lot of time to finish it. And so you just become very, very effective with your time. And that's something I think is super valuable no matter where you end up after school. And so after my bachelor degree, I decided to work in an architecture firm for a year. I knew I wanted to do a master's, wasn't quite decided where yet. And so I worked for that firm for a year, which was a great experience. That's something that I would, advise to anybody, is to actually, if possible, get some work experience during school and in between school. And it really helps to ground the work that you're doing in school into real life. And I think that's always a super valuable pairing. And so after that year, I applied into the Master of Landscape Architecture program at SAPL, and I was in the first class of the program, and I, again, had a great experience there. I was kind of familiar with the studio process at that point, and so I felt like I could just enjoy it a little bit more, maybe the second time. But yeah, one of the things that I think really also stands out is, I kind of mentioned it, but it's the idea of having to rework a project. And that's something that I think in normal courses in university or in school, you kind of finish a project, you hand it in, that's it. But in studio, you're often asked to, the second phase of the work, rework that same project. And that's a really hard process, but I think it's something that's super valuable for your work afterwards, because you're often asked to relook and improve work that you're doing. And so after I graduated from the landscape architecture program in 2018, I went and worked for Dialogue for a little bit. And then I went to the city in the planning department where I am now. I had worked, the first time I got in with working with the city was as a summer student throughout the landscape architecture program. And what I mainly do is, because I have this kind of background in architecture and in landscape architecture, and now working in planning, I think it allows me to have kind of an overall holistic view on the building process, built form in general, including buildings, including public realm, including park space, open spaces. And so what I help do a lot at the city is I help translate planning policy into what does that look like on the ground. And so helping to produce those visuals that can help test different things. One of the examples of the work that I did at the beginning was I helped illustrate and kind of write design guidelines for backyard suites. And so that's the kind of project I've been working on. In the last couple of months, I've been working with Kate before she went on her leave on the Guidebook for Great Community, which is a planning policy document for all our built out areas in the city. So yeah, that's kind of been my path, a little bit all over the place, but I think having a little bit of everything helps to kind of give an overall view on how our cities build out. And I really liked that diversity and the diversity that design school ultimately allows you to have.
Thanks, Alexia. So now we want to open up just for maybe 5-10 minutes for questions. So if anybody has any questions, you can just unmute yourself and ask the presenters.
Do we just put the question in the chat first? Or is it like a hand raising you want us to use?
You can just ask if you just want to ask, that's fine.
Of course. Okay, well, first of all, thank you all for being here today and putting on this event. We really appreciate it. It's great to get insight into all your positions. My name is Paxton Porter. So I took a undergraduate at the University of Calgary. I took urban studies. I also took some classes from EVDS during my undergrad. So I was actually taking some master's classes. After graduation, I've been working at the city of Beaumont for 2 years. That's a municipality in Alberta attached to Edmonton. I'm their current planning technician. I really like it. I get to do a lot of 3D modeling, a lot of 3D printing. I helped work on their urban design guidelines, land use bylaw. We just passed our transportation master plan, which is the first master plan that I got to design. So it's really cool. And my question is, during the portfolio process, I'm applying to the MARCH, the MARCH and Master of Architecture, which is different than the planning that I'm kind of used to. And what could I do to have that portfolio kind of be more angled, I guess, towards architecture and less towards planning? Where someone looks at my portfolio and they says, okay, this guy's he's just done a bunch of planning. He's worked in some urban design and stuff. That's great, but show us something else. Like, what are you guys, I guess, looking for in that context?
I mean, my advice would be, I guess, from the architectural perspective, would be with portfolios. I think some things that people assume is how do I, in this case, your question is sort of how do you make your portfolio more like an architect? And I think actually that the most strong portfolios that I see are unique in that they differentiate themselves from, from others. And so I wouldn't be shy about your background. I would celebrate it. And I think, anyone looking at the diversity of portfolios will recognize what we've sort of been talking about today, which is that, bringing diverse backgrounds together in the architecture program is really sort of the goal. So I wouldn't try to downplay your planning experience. I would celebrate it. And then if there are, one tip I would have is, when I review portfolios, it's looking for people who think creatively, and that can apply to any field. It can apply to any project. So, and that can take various forms. Some of my favorite portfolios are the weirdest ones, where someone like sewed some sort of crazy bag, and you see the kind of unique personality of the applicant through the portfolio. To be frank, the most boring portfolios are the ones that try to just check off, like, I think this is what architecture is, and I'm going to just try to do that. So I think, like, celebrate your background, and then where you can show off your creativity in whatever form, I think would be my advice.
Great, that helps a lot. Thank you, Jesse.
I just want to build off of what Jesse's saying, and this is coming from one from a planner and two from someone who, until I was at EVDS, which is now SAPL, had not, as I mentioned before, had never gone through design school or background in arts or anything like that. And even since I've graduated, talking to some students who are considering applying to the program, there's a lot of self-doubt around, am I actually creative? What do I even have to put into a portfolio? And I would say you probably have way more than you think that you have. And it may be helpful to share, like, to collect a bunch of things. You're like, is this something I'd even put in there? Talk it through with someone and see what as you describe those projects and what you did, they'll probably notice some of the key things about that project and what is interesting about them that because you did it, but it's hard for us to articulate positive things about ourselves often, right? And I also think there's sort of, when you're looking at the information on the admissions webpage, there's a really key word that I think we don't focus on enough when we're putting our stuff together for applications, which is that demonstrates your creativity and or potential. That potential is a really key thing. And I think if you're including a sewn bag, like Jesse mentioned, what were you exploring with that? And what did you get out of that project? Really briefly, right? Because there's, less is more in terms of the text, and you want to tell the story with the images and with the whole thing. But yeah, I think you probably have way more than you would realize to offer architecture or for anyone for any of the three streams that you're applying for. And it's just about how you put it together.
Thanks, I really appreciate that.
I have a question from the
And I think
oh, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There's always a little delay. I was just gonna add that I think that Kate touched on a point that is important to highlight, is that oftentimes we focus on the end product, or trying to get the best, image of the project, or the best final sort of rendering, whatever that is, or plan, but I think that what really stands out in a portfolio also is showing your process. Because no matter what the end result was, like, you have your own process for how you got there. And I think that that's just something that is super important in including, because that's just as important as the final image, and if not, more, because it shows that how that thinking process that you went through to get there.
Thank you so much.
So I have a question coming through in the chat. I have a question from Astrid. For those of us who will be applying to the Master of Landscape Architecture, including the foundation year, does that first year involve the studio process as well?
Yeah, maybe I can speak to that. I also did the foundation year in the program, and so yes, that also, right from the beginning, you start being involved in that studio process. And so one of your courses is studio, and then you have a couple of additional courses that are more in the traditional style of, of doing sort of more traditional coursework. But from the beginning, you have a studio course, and so it kind of has that project format and allows you to start going through, discovering what your own kind of creative process is. So
Thanks,
Yeah.
Alexia.
There's no differentiation in studio experience between a minor student and a master student in that first year. So I'm actually teaching Studio 1, which would be foundation year, first semester. And it's a mixture, it's always a mixture of minor and master students. And it's actually kind of funny because from an instructor perspective, I never know who's who until I go to submit my final grades, and then I can actually see the breakdown. So there's essentially no differentiation between that at all. Your experience would be similar. There may be, as per Alexia's comments, there may be differences in terms of your additional course load and how that kind of fits into the program. But from a studio's perspective, there's virtually no distinction between those.
So do we have any other questions about studio before we move on to the second topic, which we've kind of touched on? Okay, let's do our panel discussion on portfolio how-tos, so tips, and we'll go in the same sequence. So Jessie, if you want to start that off.
Sure. My remarks for this one are much less formal and I guess more scattered, and we've already touched on a lot of them, but I mean, it seems like most people attending today are thinking about applying to school. And so I guess in terms of those applications to SAPL, I mean, like I mentioned, I sat on the admissions committee when I was a student. So I got to sort of be in that process. And like I said, the ones that really, for me, stood out were ones that differentiated themselves in some way. And to Kate's point earlier, too, about like what can go in a portfolio or what should go in a portfolio, I remember coming across some portfolios that would include creative writing and would actually have, a text piece. And so don't be afraid to include things that might not, at first glance seem to be architectural or, planning related or landscape related. It's really, like we mentioned, just about showing your creativity. And I think the other part about that is showing the ability to take an idea through to some sort of physical reality, whether that's a model or it's a design or a visual or something that you create. But I mean, I think design thinking and design school in general is in many ways about navigating between ideas and the like lived experience, right? So abstract ideas, taking ideas and sort of thinking about how they show up in the built world. And so anything that, relates to that in any way, and that process even of abstraction and kind of reality, I think makes sense to include. I guess, I mean, I was going to touch a little bit too on just applications to firms and to jobs and from the employer perspective. And someone earlier in the panel mentioned, trying to get work experience during school. And I think that is really important. And I know that the faculty is sort of positioning towards that, shorter, placements or work placements within your semester, but also between semesters. And so when it comes to trying to get that work experience, something I look for is definitely design quality. I actually come from the perspective that skills can be can be learned. And so when I look at a portfolio, I'm less concerned with, do they have all the right skills? And I'm more interested in, how do they think and how will that way of thinking align with, our practice and my firm. So I think focusing on quality is important, being really selective about what you show and not just trying to kind of show everything, but be really careful and pick your best work and focus on quality rather than quantity in the portfolio. And then I think, you know, from the perspective of an employer who is in a small firm, we often also look for people who have versatile abilities. So it's always helpful, you know, in a firm where we all do everything and we are the marketing department and we, you know, we design, but we also, you know, we sort of do everything. Any other sort of value-added skills like graphic design or like the ability to put a website together or photography or anything that's sort of peripheral but supportive of the design process and of architectural practice is always really helpful too. In terms of my portfolio to architecture school, I had no background in architecture. I submitted essentially, I was trying to remember because I can't find it, it's been so long. But I think it was mostly content from, I took some arts courses in my undergrad. So I did a Bachelor of General Studies with a minor in architecture because I always had the intention to go to architecture school, and I essentially just tried to do it the fastest way I could. And so it was mostly, you know, sketches, drawings. I did have some, so I'm the weird sewed bag example, I had that. So yeah, that's essentially sort of my application was very light on architecture. I essentially only had one high school sort of drafting experience. That was it. So that's, yeah, that would be my, I guess, a summary of my tips.
Those are great. Thanks, Jessie. Kate?
Yeah, I think Jessie covered a lot of really important aspects there, and especially for those of you interested in architecture. I saw that there's a few planners in there, but I think this probably goes for no matter which program you're applying for. So there's a few, so Alexia mentioned showing or revealing some of your process. Jessie mentioned being selective with showing your best work. And I think especially for school, because it's about your academic interest and what sort of things you hope to explore through school, which of course totally shift once you're there. Not always, but not that like whatever you have expressed on your application as your interest is like something that you're tied to forever. But I think demonstrating how in some way how that interest has come up in different aspects or different projects or experiences that you're highlighting in your portfolio. And maybe that's a way to help start to select some of your projects. Because there's probably, you know, with Jessie's example, the sewn bag, there's something there that she was exploring that, that has been part of her process of deciding that she wanted to go to architecture school. And your portfolio for school is about you and it's not about a job, it's about what are you interested in and what do you hope to explore and build upon. So I think, and I have not sat on the committee to go through portfolios, so Jessie, feel free to be like, not so much, Kate. But I think it's opportunity to sort of celebrate what's brought you to that point and how you hope to build upon that. So maybe that's a way to think about what to include. And yeah, I said it before, and I think I'll say it again, and it is both whether it's including a portfolio for professional application or for this, and it's like an annoying mantra to hear, but less is more. Like really think about, like, you know, if you want to embrace the studio process for your own portfolio, have a bunch of iterations as you're putting it together and think about like really editing and only really including something that is contributing to the story you're trying to tell about yourself. From a professional perspective, I think increasingly more and more, especially with graduates coming into schools like SAPL, that there is more and more interest and requirements for planners to have graphic and visual skills. And it's not the same as an architect by any means, but it is, and Alexia touched on this a little bit, is that ability to communicate planning intent, principles, policies, regulations, and proposals in visual ways, so that we're able to connect more with what we're trying to achieve with the public and with with potential municipalities that are approving a project or whatever it may be. And so I think that that especially new graduates are including portfolios in their applications to jobs at the city, for example. And I think it helps to demonstrate some of those abilities that Jessie was talking about, which isn't necessarily saying like I have these very specific skills, but that people's abilities to communicate in different ways. So that's something that I've appreciated seeing in interview processes that I've been involved in, sorry. But I think, again, it is about selecting the right projects for each application that you're applying for professionally, and thinking about whether it's municipality or a firm, what experiences do you have that you think can contribute to the type of work or the philosophy of that firm. Yeah. That's all I can think of at the moment to say.
Thanks, Kate. Michelle?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I would iterate that as well, the messaging that you heard. But I also think it's really important to add a component of people, of citizens, and bring it back to this concept of experience and find a way to illustrate your desire to have an impact on that kind of experience, on the kind of experiences that you want people to be able to have. You know, like I said, when I went to school, there was the industrial design program, and it was right down to like how you want to put it, the experience of putting an earbud into your ear. So I think if there's a way to add a component of that and a component of like kind of society or individual person, and the value of that, I think it will place you in a good standing for what SAPL is about, right? I mean, that concept that we are building the cities that we want to live in. It's always, you know, there's always those beautiful renderings and no one's in it. Those beautiful photos that people take after their projects are first built and there's no one using the spaces. And I think it's really important to make sure that you include that kind of perspective. When I was a student and I was getting my undergrad in landscape architecture, I took sculpture throughout that too, again, just because of this concept of not trying to think in always 2 dimensions, but try to think of 3 dimensions. So it was a good break. It was a good way for me to balance that. And I think my first portfolio I did because I also had a job in between my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. Like, I think it was some type of sculpture. It was just kind of like box / origami thing, because again, I was trying to get across this concept of 3 dimension and how people move through space and how they understand space and how they experience it beyond just the 2 dimension. So yeah, I think that kind of perspective, of course, with what everyone else said ahead of me, but I think that will probably strengthen your portfolio. Unless anyone disagrees with me, feel free to say it, because I don't want to send you down the wrong path.
All good, I think, Michelle.
It's so challenging talking into a black box.
Alexia, do you want to close up on that piece?
Sure. Yeah, no, Michelle, I think that was a great last point, because I think ultimately, you know, we have to remind ourselves, like, who are we designing for, right? We're designing spaces for people to use. So I think that was a good pointer as well, and something we often forget when we're kind of entranced by beautiful objects. I think those are really great points. Hard to add anything to those. I guess I would just reiterate from my perspective is, again, that idea of showing a process. When I was putting together my portfolio, sometimes I had little projects that I had done, but I hadn't necessarily documented my whole process, right? Like I didn't sketch out a concept for this one film project that I was doing. But you can go back and do that. That's the one tip that I think is useful, is that maybe you do have a little film project that you did, or a sculpture or something else. Well, for your portfolio, you can go back and sort of illustrate in some way what your thinking process was through there. So don't limit yourself to things that you have already created. Like, you can purposefully think about how you're displaying that project on the page, and go back and add something, a little hand sketch or something that illustrates what you were thinking, what the essence of that project ultimately was. And I think seeing that evolution of taking an idea and bringing it all the way to something that is built or that is done, I think that's really, really key, because that's the process you go through in school. And so I think that that's really valuable. And the only other thing I would add is that we're often very focused on computer skills and on computer visualization, sorry. But the more I've actually advanced in my career, the more I've realized how valuable hand sketching really is. And so if you do have that ability, or if that's something that you want to explore, I totally encourage you to do so, and to develop that skill throughout school, because the ability to just take up a pen and have a conversation and show an idea really quickly is something that the computer really never will kind of capture that essence. And so I definitely encourage you to include that. And then the last piece I'll add to the list is, if you do include writing components, which is always, writing is also a very valuable skill, as much as drawing or visualization. And so make sure that if you do include writing components, that you also take care in the quality of your writing. That's something that I always look at if I see a portfolio as well, is, did they take as much care in the page layout as they did when they actually wrote out their little paragraph. So yeah, I think that I don't have anything else to add, because that was such a great list from the three other speakers.
I just wanted to acknowledge that it's super intimidating talking about portfolios, and especially as you're thinking about applying to school or your first job out of school. And this is more for the folks applying to school, that there's no expectation that your portfolio for your application is as though you're already a seasoned professional planner, landscape architect, or architect. That's the whole point of going to school. And so this is a snapshot of where you are right now. And it's all about that potential and what you want to explore. And for my portfolio, which it wasn't even called a portfolio when I applied, it was, or maybe it wasn't, I had like no idea what to do with that. Mine was all writing, because that's all that I had. And so, so that's okay. Oh, well, they let me in, so it had to have been okay.
Yeah.
And you've done really well.
Can I just follow up with something that Alexia said about this concept of computer skills versus hand drawing? I will say that is a really important skill or approach that you need to learn fairly early on when you're working, because you don't ever want to go in to a room of clients or a room of citizens where you say, okay, look at this beautiful thing, it's all done, and now give us your comments. Like, part of that is that you don't want things to look like you have come up and you have solved the problem all by yourself, because the truth is you probably have not, and you really do need to one, like I'm sure you literally are there for feedback and want input and want to be able to be responsive to the changes they suggest. And two, citizens in particular really need to feel that way. Citizens need to know that if they're participating, that it will be valuable and that this beautiful picture that you had is not the final, It's just a process along the way. So like Alexia said, that's a really important part too, like that ability to sketch easily. Not make it look like 20 hours of work has gone into this or whatever. I guess 20,000 hours of work, depending on what you do.
Okay, so we have a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions about portfolios? Now I know it's not Josh.
Yeah, sorry. This is my partner's Zoom, so I have yet to figure out how to not be Josh, but I'm Astrid. Moonlighting is Josh. So yeah, I've got a question about portfolio. I mean, it's very intimidating, and as Kate spoke to the imposter syndrome, despite being a creative person, you know, don't have an undergrad based in design and don't work in design, and you know, my art skills are 20 years old from high school, really. So aside from doing creative things in my own life, you know, you wonder within a portfolio, is it useful having like a thematic element? And if you do have pieces that you're putting together that are sort of within a theme, does it then look strange to have also other pieces showing other mediums? End question.
Can you explain to me what you mean by theme? Maybe
Well,
I just don't understand.
Themes, I guess that's not really, I'm not really explaining, yeah, I'm not explaining that well. Theme meaning, okay, so my partner and I build dart frog vivariums. It's like habitats for our frogs that we keep as pets. And so there's a whole like planning process and building the terrariums and selecting plants and all that sort of stuff. And so a lot of my pieces that I'm working on revolve around, I guess, that as a theme or an idea that has been brought to fruition. So then looking, would those pieces be enough? Should I also include, you know, some other like photography that I've done or some sketches that I've tried that aren't related at all to whatever, building a vivarium or, you know, frogs or plants or, you know, just things that I'm working on? Does that look kind of strange to have, you know, 5 to 10 pieces that are related to each other, and then, oh, also some pictures of some, you know, nice landscape that I've seen recently. That's what I meant by theme.
I don't know if this helps at all, but there was a student, I think she may have graduated now, whose background was as a zookeeper. And I'd met her in some other course or I think it was a community planning event, not from the city, but in the community planning. And she expressed that she was interested in applying, was quite intimidated by the portfolio process. And, you know, coming from her background as a zookeeper, what does she include? And talking to the different things that she'd done and the different projects that she'd been part of, there's all sorts of examples of things to include, and not necessarily all themed, but that you could maybe draw some themes through them. But one example was that she, in her work, had created sort of, I can't think of a better word for them. There probably is an actual word for them, but toys for giraffes, for example, that help them to stay, help them to play in their mental development when they're living in captivity. And so those are physical objects, kind of like your terrarium probably, but there was like a problem that she was solving that she solved with that. And she included some photos of it and a brief description about what she was trying to achieve with them and what, you know, sort of the considerations that she thought about when putting that together. She also included some, and I never saw her final portfolio, so only know the things that we talked about, but some photos that she had taken, some writing pieces, because she'd been involved in some, she'd helped out with some scientific research. She also had done some environmental education. And so didn't like include the full PowerPoint slides, but kind of like a little bit of the, you know, she had shared some images from that, from those environmental education experiences. And so I don't think she themed it, but it was one, I would say my reaction is like, yeah, include those terrariums, but make sure that you're drawing on, like when Alexia is talking about the writing, be really clear as to why you've included it and what you were exploring, and what are some of the considerations when you put it together or something like that. But Jessie might have some good insight as well.
I mean, my initial thought was that sounds amazing, and like absolutely you should include it. I think, you know, if it's just 5 terrariums that aren't really that different or aren't exploring different things, then I would say probably you could just include your best one. And then, like, to Kate's point, I can imagine all sorts of ideas that could link. I mean, when you said sketches of a landscape, that seems obviously related to me, because it's like the terrarium is creating its own sort of landscape, you know, so you could be looking at the topic of landscape, or how we use landscapes, or how animals and people interact in landscapes. There's so many things. It's a very rich project that could be unpacked in many different ways. And for me, it comes back to Kate, your earlier point about like the why. It's like the purpose of why you're going into school and how your portfolio can support that purpose. And so if it's clear that like your interest in design is around how people and animals interact in landscapes, you know, everything should be selected to support that, not necessarily, and that would be the reason to choose to include something or not, rather than sort of arbitrarily saying, how many do I include, or like, what else should I include? Just thinking about how each item in your portfolio could support your reason for going to school might help you make decisions about what to include and how much to include.
So I have 2 questions coming in for the chat. We're just a little bit over time. Is everyone okay to hang around for a couple more minutes? Okay, good.
Sure.
Erin Gasparini asked, well, this is actually a question for Jen, who I failed to introduce at the beginning. Jen is our admissions officer. She usually does host these sessions, and today I'm just taking over for her just while she has temporary Wi-Fi issues. The question for Jen is, regarding the application process and the reference letters, how much importance is placed on these? Like many, I've been working for a few years post-undergrad, so we'll be reaching out to old profs. Is there specific things we should ask them to touch on in the letter, for example, experience in studio settings, or is it more to speak to overall character, dedication, and potential?
Good question. Basically, it's not a huge part of the whole overall weighting of everything in your application, but it is an important part. It can sometimes make or break an application when there's so many that they have to narrow down to how many they can offer. So yes, it's important. With regards to what they talk about, if it's a recent prof, it's easier. They probably remember you better. They can speak to, you know, what you did in class, your work ethic, all of those kinds of things. So sometimes it'll be specific and it might be related to design, but other times it might be, you know, a biology class you took, but you got really engaged, and it's not going to talk about design, but it's going to talk about you as a student. So we do want to hear from professors how they feel you'll, you know, perform at the graduate level academically, and then if they can also speak to design skills and that kind of thing, that's kind of a bonus. And you can also have a professional reference too in any capacity. Again, just speaking about, you know, your time management skills, things like that, work ethic. So really it's going to be very individually based, obviously. So how well they know you, how recently they've interacted with you. But yeah, so you want to choose them wisely, and hopefully they do love you and remember you and can speak to all of your good qualities. I hope that answers it.
Question from Cynthia, and this is again for Jen. How much is the portfolio worth in your admission application?
Well, architecture definitely has a mathematical formula. So it is worth 40%, as well as grades are worth 40%. And then 20% is the rest of your supporting documents. So landscape architecture and planning are, I would say, probably similar, but not quite as high. So, I mean, I'm guessing at the numbers, but probably more like 30%. For planning, they ask you to submit a writing sample, which is also very important. And grades are very important across all three, obviously. So LA is a bit more balanced because they don't have quite as many requirements. But yeah, it's very important. It is. And it's like can sometimes offset maybe your grades. Your GPA is not superstar level, but your portfolio shows great potential. That can also bump you up to against other people who have a 4.0. So it's always the whole package that's looked at. So just keep that in mind.
From Dan Burton, how much writing is needed to explain items in our portfolio, such as a couple paragraphs or page of supporting evidence explaining each portfolio piece? What I'm hearing is less is more. Is that the general theme of a portfolio?
I think definitely. I mean, Jesse, you've looked at them before, all of you, but I'm just going to say I've been told by the reviewers that there's only so much text they can read per application. So they're looking at your statements, depending on which program you're applying to. So I think it's a few concise sentences, maybe a paragraph per image in your portfolio, not pages and pages of writing. It's just not something that they're going to get to, like, you know, so you want to have impact. But maybe, Jesse, do you want to speak to that?
I would just echo what you said. It essentially comes down to time. And when you're, you know, when the admissions committee is looking at 100 portfolios in a day, you know, spending a couple minutes on each one, you don't have time to read a lot of text. So I would say, yeah, a paragraph maybe per project, because I typically will read a couple sentences because it does help sort of frame the project, and I can sometimes get just a quick sense of what someone's trying to do and then relate to the graphics sort of within, you know, within that conceptual framework. So it's important to have good text, but to be concise.
One last question for Emily. Emily has a background in business and is hoping to apply for the ARST minor in either 2021 or 2022. She's curious to know what the panel thinks would be helpful courses or classes to build a portfolio.
Well, I'm less familiar with specific courses. A lot of my undergrad was actually at Medicine College, but I would say, I mean, if you're coming from a business background, I would probably try to supplement that with some visual, or like, I really appreciated what Michelle was saying about sculpture, like that. I think that's a really interesting and like important aspect of kind of thinking about space, especially if we're going into the architecture program. I think that is what you said, right, Vita? She's considering architecture. Yeah.
Yeah, the architecture minor.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, personally, I found I can't remember what it was called, again, it's been so long, but I took sort of 2 arts fundamentals, like 2D graphics, you know, learning how, I think it was mostly focused on 2D, but if you could take sculpture classes as well, I think that would be really valuable. I don't know, maybe the other panelists have some ideas.
Yeah, well, and Jen, you can probably confirm, but the faculty, SAPL is offering some undergraduate courses. So you could certainly look at those. I see you nodding, so okay,
Yes.
good, I'm not making that up. And then also I would say you don't have to only take classes within the university. If you're thinking about stuff for your portfolio, and I totally get it that with school grades is a thing, and so you know, if there's some nerves to take an art class, if you don't have a background in it, you could take some of those courses within the community as well, as a way to start to explore those skills, or to get a sense of what mediums are interesting for you, or even just to be part of the creative process. I did this is my postpartum brain again, when you like sketch people, whatever that's called, course on the side when I was in school, because which wasn't part of the SAPL program, but a classmate and I were like, we have no hand sketching abilities whatsoever, and my drawing skills still have a lot of leave much to be desired, but just that exercise of learning how to thank you, figure drawing. Thank you, Jessie. Going through that process of trying to take a thought and show it visually. And that course was, or that class, I guess, that evening class was something that really helped me throughout school. And so you could do something like that while you're doing in your undergraduate program. Recognizing that there's also all your classes that you're already doing for school, and if you're working or whatever, but something to think about.
Can I speak to that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so my undergrad is in business at the U of C, and I'm also in the arts minor right now. And so Emily, you can reach out to me if you want, but I took a lot of the drawing classes that they do offer at the U of C as my electives during my bachelor's, and they also offer a lot of sculpting courses and stuff like that too. And they're just like the 200, 300 levels, so you don't need any prereqs or anything like that. So if you want to reach out to me, I can give you like a link to those and let you know which ones that I took.
Jen, I just have one question for you. If someone can't make the portfolio sessions that are scheduled in November, is there an opportunity to schedule another date later on?
What we've done in the past is occasionally if you email me your portfolio work, I can try to find a prof to have a look at it. I can't guarantee it, and we can't be flooded with emailed versions of this if you can't. But if you can't attend, we do try to help everybody that asks for it. So I would just send me an email. We can kind of coordinate, and then hopefully I can find someone to give you some feedback. It should be possible, yeah.
Okay, one last question, and I think then we'll wrap it up after that one. How much writing is needed to explain items in our portfolio, such as a couple paragraphs or a page of supporting evidence? Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind that. I'm rereading it. The chat moved on me, so I'm rereading the question before. So I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to the presenters for sharing their experiences with us. That's a lot of really insightful information I think that these potential students can take forward. For everyone who's attended, our guests, I hope you have a better sense of what design school feels like and how to make a really winning portfolio. We do have those portfolio one-on-ones happening in November, so I would encourage you to schedule those now. And if you have any other questions, I think what we can do is we had a session similar to this one with 3 professors, one from each program, earlier this week. And we might send that out with the email and a link to where you can find the video. So if you're interested in that, that'll come out with the thank you email. And I wanted to thank everyone in our SAPL team for always doing an amazing job.
Thanks, Vita.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Best of luck.
Yes, good luck to all of you. Bye-bye.
Great. See ya.
See you guys. Thanks so much.
No worries. Thanks.